welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and today we're talking about treating learning disabilities. On their last visit, our guests helped us understand what learning disabilities are, and by the way, they've got to do with brain dysfunction, something you're born with. You have it as a kid. No one gets it as an adult. Doesn't mean it's treated as a kid. They talked about the tragedy of learning disabilities not being diagnosed and not being treated, that perhaps public schools aren't always the best at doing that. If you don't treat it, not only do you have the problem of being behind in school, you have all the emotional pain that comes with being thought of by others as stupid and being thought of yourself as feeling kind of dumb when you might not be. And today they're back to talk about how do you treat learning disabilities. They did eliminate ADHD, attention deficit disorder, as marginal in the world of learning disabilities. It's more a behavioral issue. But that the main learning disabilities have to do with reading and the inability to read. Another might be even the inability to do math, and because of a brain issue. Did I summarize that fairly?
Writing.
That's a yes?
Dysgraphia is another disability that I think you didn't mention.
Okay, you're hearing, by the way, from Nira Scherz-Busch. I gave her credentials last time, our long list, and with her, Dr. Dennis Christoffersen. They're both in private practice and have worked for many years with people with learning disabilities. What was my error there?
It was not an error. You didn't mention written language disorders, which are called dysgraphia.
Okay.
And the nonverbal learning disabilities, which typically affect math, affect interpersonal relations, and organization, time management, and so on.
If people suspect that their child does have a learning disability at an early age, is this something they can read a book on how to help your kid with a learning disability, or is professional help pretty much mandatory?
I think it's about 50-50. You can find good resources, especially these days electronically, about what difficulties you see in your child, but you should also consult with your child's pediatrician and possibly a professional.
So you might not need a professional. If your child has a learning disability, they might be okay without professional help?
At the age of 2 to 3, you're reading about it and trying different things might be as much as the doctor
really?
would know.
How about at 5 or 6?
That's an age where you should consult a professional.
Oh, okay. So it's not something that can be, quote-unquote, fixed or helped or whatever well or successfully without the intervention of a professional?
Most likely you need at least the help of a professional. I would start at age 3-4.
Okay. And Dennis, what's the average age of people who come to you with learning disabilities?
It really varies. We've had 5-year-olds, which are just early on in kindergarten. The parents are just really on top of it, and really, not that other parents aren't on top of it, but they're getting help earlier. And other kids whose parents have been very diligent about asking for resources in school, help, and for their pediatrician, but for whatever reasons it's been misinterpreted or misattributed, I should say, to motivational problems or what have you. So they don't come in actually to our office until later, middle school, even high school, sometimes even college age.
By the way, I saw you raise an eyebrow when I was talking about ADHD as a learning disability.
Yeah, no, so it's not, really it's a neurological disorder and it's separate but related. So when we're talking about learning disabilities, really thinking about ADHD as separate but related, and it's also not one of the defined sort of disorders in the disabilities.
Learning disabilities. It's got its own world.
Right, but it often co-occurs, and so it certainly can manifest in with behavioral problems, but it's not just a behavioral sort.
But the most common is reading difficulties.
Correct.
Okay, and how effectively treatable are learning disabilities? Can they be? What's the likelihood of treating them effectively if you get help?
They can be treated to the point where the person who has those disabilities can do just about anything that anybody else can do, but they cannot be, quote, cured. We don't see them as diseases, and it's not something that disappears. In other words, the person who has learning disabilities with good treatment can pursue any interest, skill, ability area that they want, but they will still need crutches.
Okay. Let's take someone who's got dyslexia. Fairly high IQ, but they have dyslexia. They don't get treated till 7th grade. And let's take someone else who gets treated in 1st grade. What's going to be their different path, assuming they saw someone who's very skilled?
That's a very general question that
You bet.
depends on many factors, including what treatment they get at what age. However, no age is too late to treat. Treating
Right.
means, the way I describe it to children is like you broke your leg. You need a cast, in other words, something tutoring or teaching you the right way that will improve your skills. You need crutches, which these days are blissful assistive technology. And you need accommodations, which are available these days in the workplace, in colleges, universities, and so on. By the way, just a little mention, the assumption behind placement or treatment of learning disabilities is that a person has at least average intelligence or average IQ. So we're talking about people who, with the correct help, can basically do anything that anybody else with the same level of intelligence
Ah.
can.
Right.
That's a strong case for getting help.
Right.
Yes.
And there's different methods. So, direct instructional methods with immediate feedback are by far more helpful to children.
What
than
does that
again-
mean?
You could say a little bit more about that. That's
For what was found for dyslexia is most people with dyslexia have difficulties learning through one of the senses and have difficulties. All of our senses have their own memory centers, have difficulties usually with auditory or visual memory. The trick is teaching them the way they learn. One of the most famous sayings that my mentor had is, if they can't learn the way we teach, we should teach the way they learn. Methods, specialized, research proven methods to help people with dyslexia learn to read and write are typically what we call multisensory. In other words, seeing it, hearing it, having some tactile information fed to the brain at the same time. They're
I
systematic.
don't know what that means. Can we stop there? I don't know what that means. Seeing it, hearing it. What do you mean?
The teacher who teaches in class by giving a lecture is teaching only auditorily. In other words, the only way that you can understand what they're saying is by hearing it. Kids with dyslexia love watching TV because they see it and hear it at the same time. That's giving multisensory. It means
I
more
see.
than one sense. When you teach using a number of methods that were developed for people with dyslexia, they see the letter, say the sound, and write it in the air or in the sand or whatever at the same time. So they get information to the brain through the tactile, the visual, the auditory, seeing it, hearing it, touching it.
Okay,
at the
if
same time.
a child has dyslexia and at age 6 it's diagnosed, and if they get excellent treatment, will they then keep up throughout their schooling?
you certainly have a better chance. I like to
Yes.
think of it as an adult, maybe we can think about you and I start a job, but neither of us have really the skills to do it, but you get early instruction and support so that you have the skills to do the job, and I don't get that same information for 5 years. So I'll have a difference of working at a job at which I feel incompetent for 5 years. You get help right away so that you can produce, you can show what you know. It's not squeezed into only your areas of weakness. Like most of our public schools, kids are only allowed to show what they know through reading and writing.
Wow.
Right?
Right.
And to take in information by hearing it in lecture, that sort of thing. So kids that have a specific learning disorder, disability in those areas, are greatly at a disadvantage, which is why the whole Disabilities Act comes in, to allow them to be able to show what they know because they're of average intelligence or higher. So that whole thing about And I really think it's like that. The kids, when we're kids, our job is to go to school, and it's a full-time job. And kids often, if they don't get the accommodations, they don't get the right type of instruction, they feel absolutely incompetent, foolish, embarrassed, and they're exhausted by the end of the day. So that's a really good way to think of it. How do you think you would feel if you had a year of feeling incompetent at your full-time job, 6 years, 7 years? You can start imagining what the consequences might be. One of the most important ones are avoidance. So if we don't feel we're good at something, why would we want to do it? We try and get away from it. We avoid, and unfortunately, that's one of the consequences that we see if kids come in later. They've really adopted that as a coping defense, so that if they are really good at anticipating things that they will likely fail at, and they don't even want to try anymore. Then you get into a double whammy of, I have a disorder, but now anything that even looks like I might fail, I'm going to avoid it. So they don't persist. And that's one of the keys to success, right? Is that we have to persist to achieve.
So then it comes to you, you've got a double whammy. You've got to work with their learning disability and their emotional deficits.
Absolutely.
We call it the emotional baggage.
Yeah.
And that usually starts developing in kids with average, a little bit above intelligence by the age of 6 or 7. In kids who are gifted, and approximately over 50% of kids that we've worked with in 33 years had IQs over 130.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And in those kids, there is a phenomena that happens very early that Dennis talked about. They don't see themselves as, quote, normal learners very early.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, that's a core loss that results in grieving. And grieving means denial, anger, anxiety, a whole slew of emotions that needs to get...
By the way, is there some correlation with high IQ and learning disabilities?
Not necessarily. Learning disabilities are considered learning disabilities instead of cognitive disorders in people with average and higher intelligence. Many in the field of learning disabilities believe that your brain compensates for some of the areas where it has difficulties by overdeveloping skills in other areas. So we have very
makes sense.
Exceptional visual spatial learners. We have people like Einstein, like other...
Did he have a learning disability?
He had severe dyslexia and ADHD.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are we off or not?
We're on.
Okay, I'll tell
We're
you later. But Einstein, Edison, Westinghouse, I mean, I can go on and on with Steve Jobs, of course.
What was his learning disability?
Dyslexia.
Wow.
Steve Jobs is a famous dyslexic. Henry Winkler, the Fonz, has written numerous books about it. Steven Spielberg.
Okay, so let me back up.
Mostly in areas that have to do with art, with math, with science, famous scientists.
Which kids love hearing about, by the way, right?
Yeah, so, and we tell them that.
May I at this point back up to where it begins, which is diagnosis. Can parents who, let's say their kid is in 7th grade and they're pretty sure something's wrong, can they rely on the public school if they ask, saying, would you diagnose my kid?
Yes, no, maybe. That's great. That's right. There are programs in the United States. There are states that have what's called early identification, which means if kids have actually not learning disabilities, because our schools interpret learning disabilities as difficulties reading, writing, and math, and you don't do that when you're 3. But there are actually 0 to 3 programs that will identify kids who have difficulties motorically or have difficulties with language. There's early childhood programs that are also programs for kids who have speech and language or whatever difficulties. But specific disabilities are typically not diagnosed in schools. In fact, we're going into a model that's called multi-categorical, where we put everybody with learning disabilities together, or emotional disturbance.
We being schools?
School system.
Is that a good or bad thing?
It's a horrible thing.
Okay.
First of all, because many kids who have certain types of learning disabilities can't deal with extra noise, with a lot of external disruption that kids with emotional problems do. There is no reason to put a kid like me with a math disorder. I speak and read and write in numerous languages with someone who can't read and write and has language problems and needs help in that.
Well, let me ask you, let's get to the beginning of diagnosis. Let's go to the 6 or 7 year old, the parent with the 6 or 7 year old. What should they do to get it diagnosed?
I would try to start with the school, but I would also look at going to see a professional if you have the means to do that.
Okay.
Sometimes with the schools, I mean, not to bash the schools by any means, but a lot of times they may use screening instruments or general sort of things that really don't go deep enough. And so, especially if you have, a kid that's very bright and they show average ability, if things can look okay, but what really is like this may be an exceptional kid who actually average for them is a sign of trouble, but so it's often missed, and schools are overworked and constantly their budgets, are challenged.
Okay.
And
so what I'm hearing is, if your kid is not performing well, you think there's something wrong in the school diagnosis, you get a diagnosis and they say we don't see anything wrong, don't trust that.
Schools don't really diagnose. Actually, special educators and school psychologists who are in the public school system are not allowed to use DSM for a diagnosis. So what they look at is they assess kids in order to see how they compare to other kids in the reading or writing or math or whatever, school-wise, educationally, but not really. They will tell the parent if they think the kid has ADHD or one other thing that is not exactly just reading, writing, math, to go and see a professional.
Okay, so they refer out. So you see a professional.
Sometimes they have to pay for it if they refer out, so they don't usually do that.
I'm going to ask you a very specific question. Hope to get a specific answer. What's the range of price if you hire someone privately to diagnose for learning disability? From X dollars to how many dollars?
In our clinic, and we're very low chargers, so it's about $2,500.
$2,500 is low.
Nationally, it's about $4,000 or $5,000.
And what if you happen to be a person who doesn't make a lot of money and can't afford that? What do you do?
There are some centers around the country that, not so much for diagnosis actually, but there are centers in the country that would do treatment for free. The Masonic Masons, 32nd degree Masons, have developed Masonic dyslexia learning centers around the country. I think there are about 60 right now, where they provide free tutoring using research-based methods. Excellent program. There's one down the other side of our town here. But that's for treatment, and they will take only kids who either were diagnosed privately or have special education learning
But
disability.
you still have the same issue. How do you pay for diagnosis?
It's difficult.
Okay.
I think one of the things that parents should be aware of too is that it no longer requires, kids don't have to wait until they fail and get a diagnosis and then get put into special education. That's the latest thing it's called RTI, response to intervention. So kids who are not progressing are supposed to be given interventions that help advance them and don't let them fall behind. That's one of the principles of No Child Left Behind.
But do they know a learning disability to help you with it?
Well, you don't even need to. So the idea is don't wait, because really to be diagnosed sometimes with a learning disorder, peer disability, people have to wait until they're even more behind. So the idea is early, if the child isn't learning or progressing like their peers are, the teachers hopefully will have the training, and schools can use some of the public funding from the Disabilities Act to train teachers to do this, is to provide focused interventions and keep increasing the level of intervention needed until the schools can do that, and the parents are supposed to be informed of it. But it's newer. It's one of the latest iterations of the Disabilities Act, right?
But Dennis, can the schools do what you do? I mean, if someone comes and wants specialized one-on-one help with dyslexia.
No, not in that specialized way, right?
They can. They don't, because of mostly philosophical differences and
resource issues too, right? Or,
I think it's more training, because they certainly do have the resources to have special education classes that are small enough, that get government subsidies, that can, if the teacher has the right training, they can't use that kind of training. There's been some huge arguments between the public and the private sector and educational sector about our schools where we live here will typically tell parents we don't recognize dyslexia, or we don't believe in dyslexia.
right.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Or
yeah.
the kid is not bad enough, we'll have to wait until they're bad enough.
I'm having trouble figuring out what the guidance you're giving is to parents then, all over the world, or in the United States. I'm hearing some
The
schools
United
do.
States actually is better than many other states.
Countries.
Countries. I'm from Israel originally, and until recently there are no special ed programs.
Okay, but here,
So we have special ed here, but the philosophy, I never blame teachers, because I think teachers decided to be teachers not because of the salary or because of how easy the work is, but because they want to see people succeed and they want to teach. I think the preparation of teachers, many people think the preparation of teachers to work with a large variety of brains that learn differently, it is a very difficult thing to do in a classroom of many kids, but the preparation is insufficient to enable the teacher to actually help the kids.
okay, so you've got at least 20% of kids, you told us in your last visit, that have learning disabilities. And what I'm hearing is, if you have the money, get it diagnosed privately to be sure you get it accurately.
I'd say for parents, to be aware, trust your judgment, like we said before, early intervention, be aware. In public schools, that's one of the good things. You have rights. There is the Disabilities, Act, Education Act. Resources are available. In public schools, parents have rights to those services.
But Dennis, I'm confused. They have rights to the services, but I'm hearing the services aren't very adequate all the time.
But they can be, and that's something we don't have control over.
Some schools
I think
are, some aren't.
More importantly is for parents. Parents have to, nobody, or it's usually parents don't chase after, schools don't chase after the parents to say, oh, did you know you have a right to this? Parents have to educate themselves and advocate for their kids. And with that early identification and advocacy and partnership with the schools, there are some real success stories out there, and it varies. School District A can have an excellent response and really be welcoming. We've had school districts that have invited Nira in, educate our instructors. We've had other school districts that fight it tooth and nail because they're resource deprived or whatever, or it's an ideological difference, whatever. So I guess to your point too is, trust your judgment, early intervention, know your rights. Private schools aren't obligated, right?
Okay, well let me switch the conversation.
Yeah.
In comes a client to see you, Dennis, and this girl is in 5th grade. She has low self-esteem. She has dyslexia. She has an IQ of 125. And she hadn't been identified before you saw her and diagnosed that she has dyslexia. What are the tenets of treating this girl? What are the protocols?
Well, I think first of all, what's in place to help her move forward educationally? And so
she's got one of the lousier schools.
I think one thing I think Nira does a really good job at is kind of identifying, for one, documenting a disability, and two, what specific interventions would really help this child. So not just throwing interventions at a kid that, really understanding.
What are the options here? What might help her?
There's several different academic accommodations that could be available.
At the school.
And at the school, and then going to advocate and really explaining to teachers and working with them about helping them to understand this is how this child learns. These are the things that would be most helpful. These are areas of strength that you could play to. These are areas of weakness, and what could be in place.
What kind of things would be helpful?
some of the things Nira had talked about earlier, multi-sensory sorts of, learning approaches. It depends on the disorder, the disability.
Sure.
So if it's dysgraphia, rather than trying to force the kid to write, that's probably a losing battle. Allowing assistive technology, allowing use of keyboarding. Reducing techniques that would shame or stifle the child, like public reading sorts of things, allowing them to show what they know in ways that aren't just narrowed to their particular area of disability.
In private practice is part of what you're doing, advocating, teaching the kids
yes,
and parents
especially
how to
Nira.
advocate?
Nira will go to the schools and with parents as part of the team and really help them convey to the school what is this child's needs.
I almost always go with parents to meet with the school. If it's a private school, with the teachers, and maybe principal, or help the parents understand special education law so that they can make a referral, because there are different things. You don't necessarily, if the kid doesn't seem like he or she will qualify for special instruction, which is special education, there is a law or legal way to provide them just with accommodations. We call it Section 504, which is
accommodations what Dennis was just talking about?
We do go with our clients to their school. We go to agencies with our older clients, colleges, whatever. The most important thing for me is I also spend a considerable amount of time with the parents, with the kid, our client, explaining to them what it is that causes those difficulties, but primarily I'm more interested in the strength, because they're the ones that you can then use in explaining to the school, to the kid, to the parents, how you can use those strengths to bring up the difficulties. Different recommendations for accommodations can include this kid doesn't write very well, but she or he knows a lot about whatever area in science. Let them do an oral presentation, let them do a hands-on project, filming, videotaping, which are all considered legally what we call reasonable accommodations. They're not anything that's super unusual. Assistive technology these days is a wonderful way for people who can't write well to dictate. So then you can download it, you can correct it. Almost all colleges and universities in the United States have a Kurzweil, which is equipment that you can scan anything you need to read onto, and it will read it out loud. The cursor goes through it. You can highlight and pull and make notes and wonderful things. Those are used by all colleges and universities.
What I'm hearing you say is you're helping advocate that they get the services available from public or private education.
From different places, yeah.
But what about what you do with them in your office?
We do diagnosis, very in-depth diagnosis. We also look at related issues, anxiety. Many people that we get after the age of 6 or 7 have comorbid emotional.
Comorbid means?
Emotional difficulties that work together are a result of the difficulties they have academically. And in addition, difficulties, comorbidity in the sense of if you have difficulties because of your type of learning disability in interacting with other kids, there are some horrible statistics about kids with learning disabilities being more susceptible to bullying, being more susceptible to sexual harassment and sexual problems with being attacked sexually, abused, helping them improve their understanding of themselves, their ability to say to the teacher, if I can talk about it, it will be easier for me than if I have to write about it. Being able to advocate for yourself is super important when you get to be an adult. And also, I think with teachers, and also having, for a little kid in a classroom, having the ability to say, if you let me explain it in words, I can do much better than write it down, which also makes him or her feel, I'm not stupid, I can show it to you. And that's really, really important, because I think many of the kids we work with shut themselves off at some point from learning in general because they don't think they can.
How can you help someone who comes to you in 7th grade and they're finally diagnosed and they have all these years of diminishing self-esteem and, as you say, Dennis, they've kind of closed down and just avoided learning? How can you get them up to speed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it takes work. One of the key things is for them to revision. It's like, oh, this is why I'm having problems. It has nothing to do with intelligence. I'm smart. I'm capable. In fact, I may even be gifted, if that turns out to be the case. So then it really helps them kind of, recognize the problem, and then if they have the right support set up, but they can't do it alone. There has to be a team around them, the parents and teachers, and being able to get the right sort of accommodations and have what they call an individualized educational program. And every child needs a different mix of accommodations or, considerations.
Well, I want to thank you for indulging me in trying to rush you through a very complex subject to give some feel to people who are concerned about it for their children.
Thank you.
And are there any resources that you could send people to, be it on the net, books?
There is a National Council on Learning Disabilities, NCLD, that has a wonderful website with a lot of information, easy, not highly professional item or jargon for parents. The International Dyslexia Association is an excellent organization that has representatives from all over the world. They have an excellent website which is dys.org, or just Google International Dyslexia Association. They have excellent information about not just dyslexia but other learning disorders, bibliography. There is a special section for parents, for teachers, for anybody else.
Well, thank you very much, Nira and Dennis.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.